Hello, my fellow strawmen, and welcome back to the Fields of Hay. Today I'm back with more answers for all the theists who want to understand my worldview, and this time I'll be answering questions from the channel Faith That Works Daily. Based on the user tag on the channel, I think the guy's name is Wayne. If that's wrong, I apologize, but it's the best guess I have, so I'm going to run with it. Regardless, he's very passionate about his beliefs, and in this video he has 7 questions that he thinks should make an atheist like myself consider belief in a god. Let's see what he's got.
Have you ever had a thought pop into your head that was so dark, hateful, or destructive, and you immediately thought, whoa, that's not me. Where did that come from? Why do you think completely foreign, evil thoughts can suddenly appear in our minds just like that?
Wayne clearly has an answer in mind about dark thoughts coming from demonic influences or something, but just because he has an answer in mind doesn't disprove the one I would give. I would say that our minds generate thoughts based on all sorts of things, from hopes and fears to loves and hates. As an example, when I'm speeding down a country highway and I see the oncoming headlights, and I know that I could end us both if I just let the car drift over the center, that's part of a very natural fear response. It lets me see the danger clearly and forces me to acknowledge the power and responsibility I hold through the steering wheel. That realization that I could end the lives of everyone in both cars isn't some demon in my ear trying to get me into a terrible accident. It's awareness of these potential horrors so that I can avoid them, and in this particular case, it helps me concentrate on hugging the edge of the lane. And even when it's not just an acknowledgement of what could be, even if I were to repeatedly think about killing someone to the point of planning it out, that still doesn't mean there are demons. Maybe I got a whiff of mold and it's making my brain more aggressive, or maybe I'm just not the kind of person I think I am. Ultimately, this example does nothing to conclude that there must be evil spirits invading our minds.
If genuinely evil thoughts can invade our minds from the outside, doesn't that suggest there's something outside of us? Some kind of intelligent evil influence or spirit that can plant those thoughts.
Yeah, of course. It wouldn't really be possible to invade our thoughts from the outside if there were no outside invaders. Therefore, if our thoughts were invaded from the outside, that would be evidence of such invaders. But why should I take that first step and assume that our minds can be invaded by evil thoughts? Just because we have thoughts that feel as though they weren't our own doesn't mean that they come from some other entity. Wayne just assumes that my answer to the first question was agreeing that dark thoughts aren't really us, and that something outside us is influencing us, and then just keeps building off that point. I'll try to follow his questions as hypotheticals, but even if I agree with him on some points, it doesn't mean I'll question my views. Already the line of questions he wants me to ask are entirely irrelevant to me.
If evil spirits or influences exist and can affect human minds, doesn't it make sense that good, loving, peaceful thoughts that suddenly come out of nowhere in terrible situations could come from good spirits or influences as a counter-influence?
Sure, I guess that as part of some cosmic balance, the existence of evil spirits would seem to imply the existence of good spirits. We could also just say that good thoughts imply good spirits imply evil spirits, so I don't know how the order of this is all necessary. But more importantly, none of that addresses why we should treat sudden good or evil thoughts as evidence of outside influence merely because they feel not to have come from within. We know about all sorts of illusions, from the optical to the mental. The mind can play tricks on itself, so strange thoughts and feelings just aren't evidence of supernatural forces.
The Bible says humans were...
Whoa, hold on there. This isn't preachy time, this is Ask Atheist Questions time. Wayne is more than welcome to use the Socratic method to try to use the questions to lead me to my own conclusions about God. But he's not welcome to repeat baseless assertions from the Bible. Even if, up till now, his questions actually led anywhere, it wouldn't follow that we should care for what the Bible has to say. A Hindu could have led with the same line of reasoning about how dark thoughts point towards spiritual good beyond us, and then start quoting from the Vedas. It would have been just as disconnected. So I'm going to skip the part where he uses the assumption of the Bible to justify thinking that our mortal bodies hold immortal spirits inside them. And by the way, this means I get to skip 3 questions, nearly half of the 7 questions in this video, because apparently Wayne has such difficulty understanding views outside his bubble that he doesn't realize we atheists don't derive beliefs from what the Bible says. So that just leaves us with 1 question left that's worth any of our time.
If all of this is true, that evil spirits oppose us, good spirits exist, and our real self is an eternal spirit trapped for a little while in a clay body, wouldn't putting your faith in what Jesus said and did be the only rational way to make sure your spirit ends up safe forever with God? instead of enslaved forever with the devil ones. Don't you think?
Sure, Wayne, if all this is true, then I want to kiss Jesus' ass all day long to keep myself out of the eternal torment that is hell. But I have no reliable way to tell that it is true. I don't know how to tell the difference between my own thoughts and thoughts implanted in me from the outside, if such thoughts even exist. To say that a dark thought is indicative of evil spirits assumes far too much about how we think. It assumes that we have perfect self-images of ourselves, that our mind could only come up with thoughts in line with its own conscious expectations. And it assumes that there is no possibility that we could surprise or even deceive ourselves. In Wayne's case, I also sense a fear in him that this life is all there is, and it is an emotional hope for immortality that drives him to believe in the spirit. I find these points to be unconvincing, and so Wayne's questions pose no challenge at all to my worldview. Let's see if his next video is any better. It only has one question, but apparently it's so good that he doesn't think atheists can answer it at all. Let's see if he's onto anything.
Why does anything exist instead of nothing?
I don't know. As far as I can tell, the universe is necessary in its being, and I may never know why. It's an unsatisfying answer, but it is an answer, and not even a problematic one because I don't expect to know. Under atheism and as a limited human, metaphysical questions like this should be beyond my reach. I can give some speculation about how nothing isn't a valid concept or how reality is necessary in its being, but the truth is, I don't know for sure what the answer is. Funny thing is, though, Wayne is just as unable to answer a very similar question. Why does God exist rather than nothing?
You could have a universe with no matter, no energy, no space, no time, no physical laws, no quantum fields, absolute nothingness. Not even the potential for something to exist. So why isn't that the case? Why is there a universe?
Conceptually, I concede that vastly different universes could be possible, but metaphysically, I don't know which ones could actually exist, nor do I know the standards by which we could tell the possible ones from the impossible. It would go against my position to explain why our universe can exist, in contrast to other variants of a universe that couldn't. So I won't. But the question of what kind of universe we have is different than whether or not there is a universe at all. And to that, perhaps the reason why something exists rather than nothing is that nothing can't exist. If nothing existed, well then that nothing would be some version of a something to even have the property of existence in the first place. And so something would exist, and then it'd be false to say that nothing exists. It's a self-contradictory thing, because any version of nothing that exists in any real sense would be a something. It seems plausible enough to me, even if I can't confirm it for sure. But even if this purely philosophical and admittedly unscientific answer isn't satisfying to you, then a comparison of arguments may be more enlightening. I can ask the same question to the believer of why God exists rather than nothing. And they have similar options to choose from, that either God was caused by nothing or is uncaused. I don't know anyone who will say that God came out of nothingness, that first there was nothing and then there was God. No, it's always that he was uncaused. He's eternally existent in some timeless sense. And nobody can explain to me how God is this way. In that same fashion, I simply say that the universe is uncaused and eternal, and perhaps timeless before the Big Bang. In fact, as far as candidate uncaused causes go, I think the simplicity of a primordial universe is a far likelier option than the complexity of an intelligent being.
This question was first asked by the philosopher Leibniz in the 1600s, and it's never been answered by atheism.
Nor by theism. God isn't nothing, so he must be a something, and thus not an answer for why something exists. Saying the universe exists rather than nothing because of God just means that something exists rather than nothing because of something. It's just kicking the can down the line. Ultimately, the answer to why something exists at all doesn't appear to be within the reach of human inquiry, so complaining that others can't answer it is a philosophically pointless dead end.
Lawrence Krauss wrote a whole book called A Universe from Nothing. But his nothing isn't actually nothing. It's a quantum vacuum, empty space, governed by laws of quantum mechanics. But that's not nothing. That's something. Empty space is still space. Quantum fields are still physical entities. The laws of physics are still laws that exist and operate. So Krauss didn't explain why there's something rather than nothing. He just pushed the question back one step.
I would entirely agree with Wayne on this point. Krauss's nothing is not the same as philosophical nothing. It's the kind of nothing that's a very esoteric and unfamiliar something. So I can understand Wayne's frustration at the way Krauss misrepresents his can kicking as a final answer, and I commiserate with him for having to get past Krauss's wordplay. But my answer still stands, unsatisfying as it is, that I don't really know why something at all exists. That doesn't lead me to accept theism unless someone can explain to me why something can't exist absent a god, a burden of proof that lies with the believer.
Okay, so some atheists say, fine, maybe the universe didn't come from nothing. Maybe it's just eternal. It's always existed. So there's no need to explain its beginning.
This was actually the moment I decided to respond to Wayne's videos. There's a part of me that sees his tone in these clips as quite silly and over the top, and it makes me not want to take his passion seriously. But then he goes and asks a question like this, and I can see the honest intent clear as day. Maybe it's just refreshing for me to hear someone steelman me where so many others seem to think that I believe existence came out of nothing. Thank you, Wayne, for tackling this point that so many others seem to miss in their echo chambers.
But here's the thing, even if the universe is eternal, you still haven't answered the question. Because now the question becomes, why does an eternal universe exist instead of no universe at all?
And I would agree, but just because I don't know the answer doesn't mean there isn't one out there. We may have to swallow the dissatisfaction of not knowing, but that isn't the same as knowing that it couldn't exist. This new version of the question changes nothing substantive about my position, nor about the parallel question I might ask a theist. If God is eternal, why does an eternal God exist instead of no God at all? I don't think it's problematic for either of us to be unable to answer this question, whose answer is fundamentally beyond our capabilities to understand. The only thing I see that breaks the symmetry is that an uncaused intelligence such as God is tantamount to solipsism, and that the personality, knowledge, and moral opinions of an intelligent being are inherently so complex that solipsism could not be true. But if you want my full argument on that, go watch my video on the argument device.
So why does that eternal something exist? Why isn't there just nothing forever? You can't answer that by saying, it just does. That's not an explanation. That's giving up on explanation.
I think I've made my point clear by now that I agree. I can't explain why the universe is how it is. Not for sure, not really. But if it's a problem for me to give up on the explanation, it's a problem if Wayne does it too. So to him, or any theist listening, why is there God rather than nothing? And remember, you can't answer it by saying, he just is. That's not an explanation. That's giving up on an explanation, apparently.
And this is where atheism hits a wall. Because if you say the universe is just a brute fact, it exists for no reason, with no explanation, you're essentially saying the most important question humans can ask has no answer.
No, I'm not saying that there is no answer, just that if there is one, it's probably beyond us. But again, theism is guilty of the same failure. If you say God is just a brute fact, he exists for no reason with no explanation, you're essentially saying the most important question humans can ask has no answer.
Now, before you comment, this is just God of the gaps, let me explain why it's not.
It is. Wayne is saying that we don't know why the universe exists rather than nothing. We've given up explaining it. And so no explanation can be left other than God. It is textbook God of the gaps. The only reason I didn't mention the fallacy earlier is that my rebuttal has been focused on how it doesn't even fill in the gap.
God of the gaps is when you point to something science hasn't explained yet and say, therefore, God did it.
No, it's not called God of the scientific gap, it's just God of the gap. It's not restricted to things we expect to one day answer with science. It's anytime you point to anything we don't have an explanation for and conclude that therefore God is the explanation. Whether we expect to someday reach an answer is irrelevant because our inability to access an answer does not validate the inaccessible, unfalsifiable answer you have in mind. A lack of disproof is not proof. There's a lesson to be learned from all the ancient people who wrongly believed Thor or Zeus caused lightning, but if you think it's that we shouldn't draw conclusions that one day may be proved wrong, you've missed the deeper issue. Imagine someone who believes in Thor because they can't conceive of any other explanation for lightning. They never even considered the true explanation. They never did their due diligence to lay out what possible options were on the table and investigated them to rule out the ones that didn't hold up to scrutiny. But the key fact wasn't their failure to lay out the options, it was their failure to rule those options out. If the believer had considered that it could be negative particles out of balance with positive particles, but had then decided that investigating such particles was beyond them, that would not have justified their belief in Thor. The key lesson is not that it's okay to jump to some conclusions so long as we have no way to investigate competing explanations. The lesson is that we shouldn't jump to conclusions, period. Don't fill the gaps with God, just let them be gaps.
Like saying, we don't know how lightning works, therefore God causes lightning.
Or like saying, we can't know why the universe is as it is, therefore God made it that way.
That's bad reasoning because science can explain lightning. We just didn't know how yet.
What about thousands of years ago, back when we didn't even know how to do science yet? Before we could even know that science might one day provide an answer, was explaining lightning with God good reasoning then? Or was it bad reasoning simply because the inability to give an explanation is insufficient to validate whatever explanation comes to mind?
But the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is fundamentally different. It isn't something science will explain someday. It's something science can't explain by definition, because it's asking about the existence of the natural world itself.
Science's inability to explain something makes no difference. What if there's some other technique we don't know about that could investigate the question? Then there may be hope after all of one day finding the answer, and the conclusion we're trying to jump to is suddenly at risk of being in contradiction with future discoveries. This is why, fundamentally, what Wayne is doing is exactly equivalent to people who believed in Thor because of lightning. Whether it's his inability to explain the universe with science or their inability to explain lightning by observation, a lack of knowledge about where to even begin finding an answer is not a justification for God. So, if you want to avoid a God of the gaps fallacy, or more generally any argument from ignorance, it isn't enough to avoid jumping to conclusions merely because we expect science to one day find an answer. You must avoid jumping to conclusions anytime you lack explanations, and science's ability or inability to one day provide an explanation is irrelevant.
So this isn't a gap of scientific knowledge. This is a question that requires a different category of explanation.
No, it's a gap of knowledge, period, and what it really requires is an admittance that we may never know the explanation. The last thing it requires is for us to just jump to an answer.
A philosophical or metaphysical explanation. And historically, the best explanation has been there's a necessary being, something that exists by its own nature and doesn't depend on anything else that caused everything else to exist. That's what people mean by God.
But that's not all people mean by God, is it? Usually they're also referring to a being who is an intelligent, willful agent. I know from the last video that Wayne is a Christian, and the biblical God certainly has these qualities. Those don't just get to be added on for free, and if we don't include them, then this necessary being could simply just be the universe. There is a vast gap Wayne must jump to say it's God.
When you ask, why is there something rather than nothing, an atheist really only has three options. Option 1, say the universe came from nothing.
An option I'm happy to rule out. The universe did not come from nothing.
Option 2, say the universe is eternal and it just exists as a brute fact with no explanation. But this is intellectually unsatisfying and arguably irrational. It's just giving up on finding an answer.
No, if the universe really is eternal, then that's the answer. Unsatisfying is not the same as irrational, and there is nothing irrational about keeping the possibility on the table.
Option 3, admit they don't know and maybe can't know, which is honest. But it means atheism doesn't have an answer to the most fundamental question of existence.
And this is my answer, although it isn't exclusive to the second option. The universe may be eternal into the past, or there may have been some first state. Maybe there was even a past eternal first state, if that makes any sense. I don't know, but that doesn't invalidate my beliefs. But hypothetically, let's say it is problematic, and the universe couldn't possibly be a necessary being which just exists by its own nature. What solution could Wayne offer?
Meanwhile, theism offers a coherent answer. A necessary being, God, exists by his own nature and created everything else.
Wayne rightly has a problem with Krauss for just kicking the can down the line and calling it a solution, but he doesn't seem to realize he's doing the same thing. He's answering the question of why a universe exists rather than nothing, but in doing so, he just kicks the can down the line to why a God exists rather than nothing. He has the same three options to pick from. Either God came from nothing, or God is eternal, or God's existence is beyond Wayne's understanding and he just has to admit he doesn't know. So he chooses option two, that God exists by his own nature, is eternal and uncaused, and exists simply as a necessary being, as a brute fact with no explanation. By Wayne's own standards, that's intellectually unsatisfying and arguably irrational. He's just giving up on an answer. Do you see the double standards Wayne must apply to call God an explanation for life, the universe, and everything? Do you see why this question is a philosophical dead end?
This isn't about proving God exists. This is about showing that atheism has a massive explanatory gap at the foundation of reality. If you're an atheist watching this, I'm not saying you're stupid. I'm saying your worldview doesn't have an answer to this question. And that should at least make you curious about whether there might be something more.
Yes, there is a gap. And I have been curious about God's existence for this reason and plenty others, and I've always tried to engage with the possibility honestly. If that's as far as Wayne thinks this gets you, fine. But I think it can get you a little further. Because if there is something more to existence than just the natural world, well, that's just another kind of something. And you're still left asking why that something exists rather than nothing. And I'm not pointing this out to try to say that theists are stupid either. I'm just trying to say that they have the same explanatory gap we do. Just pushed back a step to God's existence. And I hope that at least makes them curious about whether the necessary being is really God. So Wayne wanted to know how an atheist like myself might explain evil thoughts and the existence of reality. In summary, I don't expect our conscious minds to be aware of every detail of its unconscious self, and reality appears to be necessary. But Wayne has more than just questions for atheists. One of his videos has a challenge for us, so before I end off today, let's see if I'm up for it.
I'm going to tell you exactly the way the old man told me.
I know Wayne meant this as a strong opening line, but ironically it's quite a useful insight into his beliefs. Like so many of his fellow sheep, he believes what he believes because his parents taught him to have faith, and out of faith he's never questioned his beliefs. Wayne, have you ever considered that your old man might have been wrong? Or is your faith so strong that you've never doubted what he taught you about the Bible?
Spiritual gifts help your faith to grow stronger. So if you don't have them now, I'm suggesting the next time you're alone, ask God. I want to know. I'm open. I'm ready. I know I've sinned. I know I've screwed up. If you try that just once and mean it in the bottom of your heart, and then just hold still and listen for that still, quiet voice inside that says, I love you, son. Then you'll know what I mean. Does that sound fair?
Sure, Wayne, that sounds fair. I can admit with ease that I'm a sinner. I'm prideful, blasphemous, and I don't honor my mother and father particularly well. I'm a sexual deviant, a liar, and I've failed to keep the Sabbath holy for at least a decade. Certainly by biblical standards, I am a sinner, plain and simple. If God exists, then my belief that he doesn't is just the tip of the iceberg of my screw-ups, and I would love to be corrected. So in private, I've prayed. I've imagined my thoughts projecting out to whatever higher being might be listening in, and I've asked them to reveal themselves. I've admitted that my strong atheism is only based in philosophy and reason, and although I might find it difficult to work my way out of the mental ruts I've grown comfortable in, I would be open to at least trying to understand my role in God's plan, if I could just be given some evidence of his existence. If I could be given some personal revelation that the voice I heard was divine, I would believe. Any direct experience of God's existence would overrule the philosophical reasons I have about why he doesn't exist, the same way seeing penguins in the Arctic would overrule any logical reasons I have for why they shouldn't be there. I've tried to pray to God in almost as many different manners as I've had conversations with theists, yet never once have I heard so much as a peep. That's how I know Wayne's challenge is bullshit. My atheism should be so easy to falsify, yet it has never been falsified. I have no fears about trying to falsify it. Either I further solidify my confidence in what appears to be true, or I realize the error of my ways and correct course before it's too late. So in that spirit, let me issue a challenge to any theist listening. Give me one hypothetical scenario that, if you were to experience it, it would disprove theism to you. And if there is no such hypothetical, if your belief is unfalsifiable, then how can you hold on to it with such confidence?
If you have spiritual gifts, your faith grows stronger. If you don't have spiritual gifts, means your eyes haven't been opened yet. And I don't know whether you call it good or bad, no one can have their eyes opened unless God calls them first.
When I've been begging at his door to open my eyes, why has he not responded? Why hasn't he called me yet? Knock and it shall be opened unto you, say the scriptures, and yet the door remains closed, the house silent and the windows dark. I think the answer is that nobody's home, and all this stuff about spiritual gifts and faith is just a coping mechanism to deal with people like me who don't blindly accept the Bible as God's word.
So I don't know if you can just go inside yourself now and think of all the times that something inside you lets you know that there has to be something greater in life than just us, a higher power of the universe.
Intuitions are not evidence, but if they were, then Wayne would just have to deal with the fact that I'd never felt that way. In fact, it was much the opposite for me. Throughout my childhood, I told myself and others that I believed the Bible because that's what I was taught to believe. But deep down, there was always a little doubt. I'd read fiction, and the Bible sure had a lot in common with fantasy. I'd accepted that a higher power explained the universe, but then I wondered what explained the higher power. It took me a while, but I put the pieces of my intuition together in the end, and realized that belief in a higher power has a lot more wishful thinking than rational justification. So, if that's what the voice inside me has been saying, I guess atheism's true. Or if that voice is fallible, then maybe neither of us should be using it as a guide to metaphysical truths.
Humans can't be the creator of everything.
Of course humans didn't create everything. That doesn't mean there's a higher power. To be clear, if by higher power we're talking about the things that made stars, planets, mountains, life, all the things humans couldn't have made, then of course I believe in higher powers. I believe in the Big Bang, gravity, supernovas, weather, biochemistry, and so many other higher powers I couldn't possibly list them all. But if by higher power we're talking about an intelligent designer of all of the above, how is it relevant to point out that not everything is made by humans?
All the times you hear atheists giving excuses not to believe in God, realize that's what they are. They're excuses. They can't prove what they disbelieve any more than we can prove what we believed.
I can prove what I believe more than Wayne can prove what he believes, because I have the argument device, link here if you're interested, while he leans almost entirely on faith. Meanwhile, it'd sure be weird if agnostics could prove a belief they didn't hold, so in their lack of belief they owe no proof. Honestly, it's kind of sad that Wayne puts his ability to prove God on equal par as them, even though he holds a belief and ought to be able to provide a reason for it, if not a proof. And for the record, that's all I ever claim of Ice. It's a reason to justify my belief, it isn't outright proof. Even if I'm wrong, even if it's flawed, you can't fault me for giving it an honest attempt to reach a conclusion, and it's pitiful if you call it an excuse not to believe.
Have you ever seen an atheist that wasn't just angry as hell because everyone doesn't agree with him?
The more times I watch this clip in editing, the funnier it gets, so consider it your reward if you made it all the way here. That exasperated huff right at the end betrays some repressed anger on Wayne's end, I think, because so many people don't agree with him. He's clearly projecting here, and the irony is worthy of a Shakespearean comedy. But anyway, most atheists I know don't seem angry to me, and I don't think I get angry with people just because they disagree with me. I have many positive relationships with people who disagree with me. If you'd like a public example, so you don't have to take my word for it, I recently did my first live debate with a man named Joel Setcase of the channel Think Debates. If you watch his live stream and his debrief after chatting with me, he seems to have found it quite a pleasant conversation. Go watch that if you want to see an atheist not be angry with someone who disagrees with him. Now, on the other hand, if you see my other videos, there is one thing I do all the time that I could understand being mistaken for anger. I promise you it's not. It's just a piece of advice I believe in quite passionately. Right now, I'm reading the Three Body Problem trilogy, and I absolutely love it. Besides, my videos just wouldn't quite have that constructive criticism feel if I didn't give you an action item to wrap it up with. So truly, it doesn't matter what kind, whether it's scriptures or sci-fi or any genre your heart desires. Just go read a fucking book.